All right, welcome BV school community members. Thanks, Mrs. Flanino. We got lots of families. This morning we had some staff. Mr. Hochreiter and Dr. Roller are unavailable tonight, but I will do my best to kind of recap some of the things. The YouTube video is available. I think Mrs. Flanino shared a link earlier to that. And after I introduce things, there'll be plenty of time for any questions and answers. I just ask that you keep your mute on, put it in the chat, and I'll be happy to go through everything however long it takes. So at this time, we are in a position in HUD and in the region that we have two options. We have the fully remote option, where you commit to around January to experience remote teaching, and we'll talk more about that. Or you can come in full-time in the typical fashion as in person, but it'll be a reduced class size of no more than 15. And to be honest, at the current numbers, it's even lower. And with the remote survey coming up to the 24th, we expect it to be even higher remote, which would mean lower in person based on the survey data that Mr. Hochreiter's been talking about. So let me start by kind of sharing something called a day in the life. I'm going to share my screen with everybody. So present now. All right, so this is something that Dr. Ruller created, not as like a exact minute-to-minute play-by-play, but a gist of what you can expect. Okay. And these are actually somewhat similar for in-person and remote, because the aspect of a morning meeting where you ask how's it going, you check in, maybe pose a question for kids to talk or add on to what others are thinking about will happen. That's about 15 minutes. In the remote model, let's say it's 8:45 to 9, everyone would be expected to sign on at the set time. Dr. Ruller shared this morning that we don't want to see like a J for Josh up there. Some anecdotes involve kids not necessarily being there, responding when questions were asked. So this year they're going to be taking attendance, and they're going to be doing it by seeing you in the camera with your picture. So we're going to ask that when students show up, they have their image there and not the icon, and they're going to be expected to participate and contribute. So that morning meeting's really to set the tone, check in how kids are doing, and then these three subjects are the focus for remote: reading, math, and writing. Not necessarily in that order, but teachers will start with a mini lesson. Today in reading, we're going to work on whatever the topic is. The teacher will model it, go over the expectation for the students, and that will be the teaching time, about 15 minutes. Then, whether it's in breakout groups through a feature of Google Meet, that should be here around October, or whether it's just separate links, the teacher will then check in with small groups, or they could do one-on-one conferring. It will really depend on what the teacher sees as the need. That'll be about 45 minutes of them checking in with different children, and they'll have a schedule that you'll know of ahead of time. Then they might move to math, and at some point they'll have a 15-minute mini lesson, again, showing the children what is expected, modeling it, talking about some common misconceptions. Then it will be time for them to work on it, and students will have a chance to check in, ask questions. Teachers can see where they're going instead of just waiting till the end and saying, oh, it was a little off here. They're going to try to tweak along the way. And then the same thing for writing. What it says here for specials is we still have to work on the logistics of that. You'll notice that we're not doing library. Those teachers are currently slated to be classroom teachers, and we thought we might use something like outdoor recess to get the kids outside, being that they'll be spending a lot of time in the classrooms. So that is one of the reasons you don't see that there. And depending on staffing, science might be a special as well, but we'll know more next week. So that's kind of a gist of what it'll be like. Small mini lessons, teachers following up with individuals or small groups, and in school as well, they would be doing the same, because that's what normal instruction in the workshop model looks like. Show them something, teach them how to do it, practice it a little bit, then it's off you go. All right, let me stop sharing for a second. Exit back. So a lot of this is been changing from day to day, week to week, based on guidance. So Mr. Hochreiter recently shared an email that at this time, he's looking at doing some superintendent conference days on September 2nd, 3rd, 8th, and 9th, which would be to kind of get the teachers ready, go over the new protocols, safety and health procedures, because all of this is new. You know, he shared this morning, he doesn't want kids getting off the bus, you know, start high-fiving friends and thinking it's what it used to be. We have to kind of train them to a new normal. Go over the expectations. On Monday, I'm meeting with Ms. Gilio from Transportation, Mr. Catalan, and Mr. Merlini from Facilities and Grounds to kind of go over this, how we're going to stagger dismissal and arrival, and all the nuts and bolts related to that. So next week is really going to be a bigger week as far as specifics, because we'll know how many people signed up for remote. We'll know how many people we have in classrooms. And then we'll be able to say, you know, here's your teacher. We're working on having some kind of meet and greet or orientation, whether it's individual families or small groups, to meet the teachers, maybe do some kind of activity, visiting spaces, depending on, you know, when this is happening. But we want the first impression to be not in front of a screen. And that includes the people that select remote. We don't want the remote students to see that teacher and have no connection or relationship. So even if you choose that option, we're looking to set up some kind of meet and greet or face-to-face to start forming that relationship. Ben, in his email that he shared, September 10th through 18th right now would be 100% remote for all, half days. And the other half would work on those things I shared earlier around professional development. September 21st through 25th would be 100% remote and full days. And then September 29th would start the live instruction for everyone. Now, again, I am putting a little star there. That's as of today. You know, there's been different versions of different groups starting at different times. So that is the most recent one that he shared with staff just this evening. But we will certainly keep everybody posted if anything changes. Let me see if there's anything else before we start going to questions. Let's see. You know, again, there's no right or wrong answer. We understand right now that people have different reasons for whatever their selection is. You know, there's a lot of anxiety, stress out in the communities, uncertainty. So no matter what you pick, we are going to support, assist, and ensure the best quality as possible. But again, everyone has their reason. There's no judgment one way or the other, and we want you to know that. I know a lot of family members have been emailing me. We've set up calls, Google Meets, or just emailed back and forth. I think that's great. You know, I'm happy to do that. The district protocol, though, is after the 24th, you're going to be committed to that remote option until January. If you say in October, you know what, I'd like to get into the in-person, it's not going to work as far as section, class size that we're trying to guarantee be low and socially distant. So you will be locked into then until that date. The other way still presents some challenges, going from in-school to remote, but that is a little bit easier to handle. So just keep that in mind when you are making your decision. And again, if you're on the fence or have any questions, please shoot me an email and let me know a day or time, a number. You prefer to do a Google Meet, and I'll be happy to set that up with you. Okay. So I think those are some of the bullet points. And what I'll do is start answering things in the chat. Again, I know a lot of you were here this morning. You have a chance to do the YouTube about an hour and a half that has a lot of things addressed. The district page also has a lot of resources. If you look under like COVID, and it has all the scenarios, a sibling sick, student in class gets this, what happens to everybody else? And, you know, that is going to be a lot of the Department of Health giving guidance. So I would recommend you check that out along with the YouTube video and community forums that Mr. Hochreiter led. All right, so how will recess be handled? So, you know, the goal is to be outside whenever possible. If we can do instruction outside, if we can do lunch outside, we're going to do that. Mass breaks, which will need to happen, will be outside. Somebody had asked about tents, and just so you know, you need to have approval from the Department of Ed, and there's some liability issues about them blowing away, hitting someone, hitting property. So that's why you won't see that at this time in our district. But we are exploring the spaces. I know Claire Carey has shared that she will be looking to get us additional picnic tables or benches. So Mr. Grant and I are going to be looking at that on Monday as far as, our biggest class size as of now. Do we have enough benches and tables to allow them to be socially distant while also being outside? As far as recess, and I spoke to a parent earlier who said, is tag allowed? So the answer is no. We're not going to be doing anything that involves touching. We're going to try to work on not using the same equipment. So Mr. Kissinger is going to be a huge asset. Him and I were emailing. He said, hopscotch where everyone has their own rock, or, that was just one example off the top of the head, but we're going to be brainstorming. I'm sure the children have good ideas that we'll vet with Mrs. Cody, myself and Mr. K, and we're going to be using our monitors. We don't have enough for each of the sections necessarily, so we'll be using teaching assistants. We'll be using aides. We're really going to be making sure that we have enough support in these unstructured areas. The other thing that came up this morning was about masks. So other than the mask break, where we're going to have them spread out and take it off for a little breather, they will be wearing masks during recess. I know there was a little back and forth based on the guidance about if I'm 6 feet away, do I still need to wear a mask? And the answer is yes. I know the guidance says barrier or 6 feet away / social distancing or a divider. And a lot of districts, including Hen Hud, is doing the and. So even if you're 6 feet away, the guidance and expectation is that the mask is on. So that, again, I understand why it can be confusing. It seems to change from time to time. But as of today, that is our district's plan and expectation. All right, so the switch from in-person to remote is possible at a later date. And it's even possible at an earlier date. If you are like 2 weeks in and it's not working for whatever reason, you would need to contact me, say, hey, can I talk to you about this? It might not happen the next day, because then we have to say, where's the section? It may or may not be BV. So let me speak a little to that. So if there's 5 kids at Furnace Woods, 5 kids at Frank G, and 5 kids at BV for doing third grade remote, they're not going to have 3 teachers doing that. They're going to have 1 teacher teaching those 15 children. So again, you wouldn't know next year's teacher necessarily anyway. So you might meet a Furnace Woods teacher, they might meet a BV teacher, but just know that is an option that they're considering for that. Let me just say. And then other than that, we want to make sure there's a smooth transition. So meeting the teacher, any kinds of things. So Mr. Hochreiter said approximately a day or 2 would be the transition if you do decide to go from in-person to remote. Obviously, we'll try to do it as soon as we can, but just wanted to throw that out there. All right, maximum number of students in a remote class. Although I'm not 100%, I think they're somewhat around 15 as well. When we looked at the as of now numbers, it looks like we have at least 1 per grade. When in some instances, let's say at BV, we have 12, and at Frank G and Furnace Wood, there's a total of 14. That's an example in a grade. I think they would look to keep all those 12 BV kids together, because that's a cohort, and then mix the other kids together to form another cohort. So they're not going to mix it willy-nilly just to do it. If they have enough at one school, they'll keep that cohort together. And if there's not enough to do that, they can look across the 3 schools to give them an opportunity to mingle as well. Also, next week, once we do this, it'll, it's not like we can't say, it's just hard to know. We're going to all sit down, have very focused, specific meetings as to what do the numbers look like, what does staffing look like. We, haven't heard what teachers are not returning, if there are any, but that might be an issue as well. Then we have to look at who is going to take that spot. And I know the guidance Mr. Hochreiter put out is it will always be a certified teacher. In the first model before remote came up, we were using AIS teachers, we were using other people, like permanent subs that have certification. With the remote option, it shouldn't be as necessary because the remote will kind of lump some people together and free up teaching spaces. But until we see the data, it's a little hard to talk to. So I'm happy to share information from there. Can parents change their mind? Okay, good question. And I actually have had 2 parents do that. They had put in the electronic form for remote, and then they asked some additional questions, and they decided they want to do in person. So up until the 24th, the answer is yes. Just shoot me an email saying, I've changed my mind. I would like to do in person. And then I will contact Mrs. Nyer, who's been collecting all the data. So your name is removed from the list. All right, what will happen if a student doesn't or isn't able to keep their mask on during the day? So there's 2 things. If there's a medical thing, we would need to know. We'd work as far as, other modifications or gear that might be more appropriate. But they do need to have a mask on. There are different accommodations and modifications that can be made. And, we're not going to come from the punishment lens. It's going to be more like, what's going on? Did you notice it's not covering your nose? It's just covering your mouth. Maybe it's a fitting issue. Maybe it's, they're embarrassed. Whatever the issue is, we'll talk them through it, provide the supports, but it isn't an option not to wear it. So, and we'll work with the families and explain, again, whether it's the fitting, whether it's a emotional issue, whatever it may be, we'll work through it with you, but it is not an option to not have the mask on. All right, the fully remote. So I do not believe that there is like the December, January question. I think it's an all or none deal at this time. We could certainly double check that with Mr. Hochreiter, but from what I've heard from all the conversations, that deadline is not like a back and forth due to class sizes, sections, teachers, and so on. Says that during earlier YouTube, it may be a case scenario that need discussion with the school. So again, what I'll do, and I'm just going to make a note to myself, is I'm going to run this by Mr. Hochreiter again, and then I will email you privately as far as what the response was. But my last understanding was it's got to be an all or none once you lock into remote. Bear with me just 1 second. All right, just send myself a reminder. Okay. So if recess is permitted outside, will the playgrounds be used? So this is a conversation that we're going to be having on Monday with Mr. Catalan and Mr. Merlini, as far as, what can be used, what can't be used. I know Mr. Merlini talked about like the spray that kind of sticks to it for 90 days. I don't know if it changes when you're outside or if there's similar logic to that. But that's a good question, one that will come up this coming Monday. Evaluations taking place for incoming kindergarten. So they decided at this time not to do the traditional kindergarten screening because the logic is to, let's not delay it by doing a slow, methodical screening process. Let's get them in, and with the smaller class sizes, teachers can get to that, the letter sounds, the letter names, the numbers, OTPT, all those kinds of things will take place in those small settings, not in a formal process. Again, these are discussions that are ongoing. So I'll again remind you of the start. As of today, this is the most current information I have from our district. All right, so the hours for a school day. So let me start by saying it for the in-school. So the in-school hours are the same. However, how we do dismissal and arrival may vary. So for instance, let's say the buses, come in that 8:30 to 9, whether we have to hold them on the bus instead of releasing to recess, or whether we, just have them supervised. These are things we're going to be hashing out on Monday. Some districts are saying, everyone wait till 9 o'clock, then we're going to all go directly to your classroom to limit travel around the building. And then the parent issue. So based on the survey, it seems like we're going to have a lot of people driving their kids to school. So we can't have everyone doing it at the same time. So we need to talk about a process for that with Ms. Gilio and Mr. Merlini and Mr. Catalan. Do we have to have like blocks of time before and after the bus times for parents to do that? I don't know the answer, but I know these are some of the scenarios that were being pitched. I believe Mrs. Gilio is sending out a survey in the near future to gauge. I don't know if it's going to be as specific as the remote, like, do you plan to drive your kid? What are the ranges that work for you? It may look like that. I haven't heard the specifics of it, but we need to get more information because it does seem like there's going to be a lot of people not using the district transportation. And then the same thing at the end of the day. So again, the hours are the same. There might need to be some shortening or extending on the ends around arrival and dismissal. But other than that, it should be similar. As far as for the remote, the kind of going back to the day in the life. So you'll have maybe a 15-minute, how's it going, check-in, and then maybe 3 15-minute mini lessons, and then a check-in with a small group or your child individually, depending on what the teacher thinks is necessary. A question this morning that was a good question that we don't have the answer to yet is what exact times? Is it going to be 9 to 10, 10 to 11, 11 to 12? Is it going to be 9 to 10 with a little break, then 10:30 to 11:30, and then, after lunch, the final one, 1:30 to 2:30? I don't have that answer, but I know that's something we want to get to families sooner than later because it's hard to plan. And if you thought you only needed a couple hours to help your child, but now they're spread out, you really then need to be around the whole day, which is very hard and challenging for family members. So don't have the exact answer, but do understand why an answer to that is needed sooner than later. All right, let's see. If a child is kept home due to a possible illness, perhaps one that would not have been an issue, absences may occur. We wait for the child to learn remotely. So that is a good question because the classroom in-house teacher would not be doing the remote because they have the full in-house responsibilities, but they may be able to jump into that grade's remote session, especially if it's a temporary issue. So I think that might be like a case by case. So if they have another issue that's unrelated to that, you would contact, I would say, me and the child's teacher, and we would work out what the best scenario is based on that. But that's a very good question that could certainly come up. If child says it may take many days, yes. And one of the things somebody else asked, it might have been a community forum, is the penalizing. So, in general, our district, you have a conversation with the principal notifying you about your absences. Then it's like, let's have a meeting. Sometimes we have to involve other authorities if it's a pattern. That is not the goal this year. We understand why, and what you're saying is what we want. We want to be able to trust in the community that if you're worried, COVID or not, that you're going to do the right thing. Because even before this, we wouldn't want you to send your child with a fever or nausea, or on Tylenol, which kind of masks symptoms. So just like always, we appreciate honesty and we want to be able to trust in our community for these kinds of issues. And so we are in turn are going to be doing the same thing. It's not like, oh, I got you. You hit 10 absences. It's, if you're doing it for these reasons, have notes, that's what we want to help get through this as soon as we can and not prolong and extend this. All right, will the incoming kindergarten class be able to do a walk through the building for orientation in time slots with their parent? So the answer is yes. We just have to work on the logistics of when. I met with Dr. Lefevre, Mr. Pin, and Ms. Scotto, who are currently slated for kindergarten. And, they had some great ideas, one of which was like an outdoor, where everyone's spaced out, bubbles, music, things like that. So we just have to coordinate that, because one of the goals is really to do this K-5 along with the remote classes. So we just have to look at the schedule the district gives us and say, if we did 5 families here and 5 families here, how do we make this work while keeping everybody apart and safe from one another? But that 100% is a priority. Will there be phase-in days that move to full day, particularly for kindergarten? So my understanding as far as live, which I believe you're asking about, is no. That half day to full day was all for the remote. And then it looks like on the schedule that we got from Dr. Ruller that it will be full days when they begin. Again, that could change. Part of what's great about videotaping these and seeing all these questions is, these also go to Dr. Ruller, Mr. Hochreiter, and so on to, sometimes parents have shared things that, were a different spin on things, and that can help make decisions. So who will be teaching the remote learning? Will they follow the same day by day as the in-person? So who will be teaching it is still up in the air. There's 2 aspects to this that will factor in. One is if they post the position, people that are interested, that have passion. I know Mr. Hochreiter shared, a lot of people have reached out, and there may be teachers that need to do these options as well. So these are all things that Laura Nyer, who's our kind of our HR person and personnel, will work on. And what's great, I know Dr. Roloff spoke about it this morning, is all year long there's conversations, about year at a glance. Where's everybody at? What are you working on? So naturally, teachers do stay together on units, curriculum planning. So the goal will be to constantly check in at grade level meetings, by school, by across the grade, with the district, working with Dr. Ruller, so that can happen. That's a great question. And again, my hope is that by the end of next week, we can give you this information. Let's see. The cold flu, and now with COVID, if your child showing signs, does the parent have to get them tested for COVID and keep them home even if it's just a cold? So what I would recommend for this one is, if you look at the HENHUD kind of guidance, let me see if I can find it here. It talks about when can a person, no, that's tested positive. Let me keep scrolling down. They talk about like the symptoms. So if you're seeing a lot of those symptoms, hold on, how are these tested? So what I would say to that, if you're showing signs of that, do you have to? I would work with call the doctor, talk to Mrs. Cody about that. They do give you a list of symptoms. I wasn't finding it right when I was looking for it. But, if you see those symptoms, I would err on the side of caution. What we don't want is to have a reason to close the school for everybody. And like I said earlier, the Department of Health will be heavily involved with what needs to happen with siblings, with the whole school, portions of that. We'll give them the data. They'll do the contact tracing and then make determinations for the district of what needs to happen. All right. Will it be a 5-day week or 4 days? So it will be a 5-day week. That was more for the middle school because of all the changes that they're doing. We're going to have the same kids in the same room every day. And the custodians will work on cleaning and sanitizing daily. Mr. Hochreiter made a comment about they're increasing the custodians. So if we normally had 2 during the day, there might be 3 to address that. But they did not have that break for elementary because of the continuity of it. Good question. The remote teacher will be expected to be in HENHUD. Part of that is so, your child will see an actual classroom. They'll have the tools, the smart board, the material, the resources. The only example Mr. Hochreiter gave earlier was, let's say the school is closed by Cuomo or Department of Health. So if it's not safe to be in the school, that would apply to everybody, and the remote teaching would take place from their house. But other than that, he has shared that they are expected to be in BV or whatever elementary school they're at. Where will children eat lunch? So the plan is to have students eat lunch in the outside setting. And if that's not the case, it will be in their classroom. 6 feet away, that will be an example of a time without the mask. Really just eating and mask breaks outside. Other than that, mask would be on. If a student goes to Mrs. Cody with COVID-like symptoms, will there be a separate area? Yes. So that's been one of the charges for each of the elementary schools, to look at your nurse area and see if there is an area, the routine, asthma, nebulizer, whatever the regular, could be cream, whatever the check-ins are for those students, and then a separate area for people that have the symptoms, isolation rooms. We're also looking at having overflow areas in case this ever gets more than the rooms can handle. So yes, this is something we're actually on Monday also meeting with Mrs. Cody and Mr. Grant to look at different options as the backups for that. Great question. Again, if anybody thinks of something, throw it in the chat. Don't feel like you got to get everything in now. If you think of things later, like I said, please shoot me an email. This morning they asked for, can we do another one of these, maybe after we know things a little bit more are concrete, once the survey ends, once you've put things to place. So we all said, happy to do that. We want to make this transition and choice as easy as possible for you, for the children, for the staff. So anytime, happy to do that. Make scheduling similar or simpler if you have multiple children. Well, let me think about that. So let's say you have, so I don't know the exact answer, but I think we're trying to have similar time frames. Like in that first example, I'm thinking for myself, if somebody said, you have it at 9 to 10, then the last one's 2 to 3, it's pretty much the whole day. So when we have these conversations with teachers and Dr. Ruller, I think we really have to take into account what this looks like and feels like for you as the family members supporting your children at home. As far as the siblings, I know for when it was like a topic of AABB Day, which is no longer there, we were saying, contact us if you need to have certain people together. Some family members have reached out saying, the 4 of us have kind of an agreement. We only see the same people. We tell each other when we go away, and can you keep us together? Whether you're doing some kind of pod or not as formal as that. So I would say just let me know. Mrs. Flanino and I are keeping lists of these kinds of requests. So when we finalize things for the year, we want to honor as many of these as possible because we know how hard it is and that you are relying on other people in the community to support you. So please don't hesitate to make those kinds of requests. Like always, when placement comes, we say we do the best, we don't guarantee, but whenever possible, we try to honor those requests. Okay, parent reach out with a question. I understand that the classrooms are being redesigned for 15 to say, the opportunity to view the classrooms. So, good question. We're trying to find an example, whether it's at one school and we share a video for everybody, or each school does that. We've all had slightly different things going on in each of the schools around security from the bond. So as soon as that's possible, we're happy to do so. The other thing I want to emphasize is that is a max. So when I'm looking at the averages that we have as of today, the averages are like 11 and a half, 10 and a half, 13, 14, 13, and 10 and a half. And again, this is 5 days before the deadline for remote. So, I know that 15 sounds high. I think it's going to be lower. And I think one of the messages we're sharing is less is more. So teachers that might have some additional furniture they use for different purposes, we are sharing that less is more as far as allowing pathways, space in the classroom, and then there's less surfaces and less things that need to be cleaned or are potential hazards. So the mantra has been less is better. Um, and again, this is something that I don't think is a secret. Once we're done, we'll be able to say, here's the numbers in each of the kindergarten classes at BV, Frank G, and Furnace Woods. Here's the number at first grade at Frank G, BV, and Furnace Woods. It's just because it keeps changing daily, it's kind of hard to say right now. In some grades we have the most amount, in some grades we have the least amount. But it keeps changing. For the remote learners, will their work be checked and returned? Where will it be returned to? Great question. So I know some of the feedback last time was, it'd be helpful if teachers had prepared things ahead of time. I could kind of have something tangible, whether it's a math unit as a for instance. And so the answer is yes, to my understanding. And as far as how it's returned, whether you're able to scan it and send it, or we have to work on some kind of drop-off system is yet to be determined. But the answer is yes regarding accountability. And I'm going to send that right now to Dr. Ruller, system 4, because I think that's a great thing for them to put out. Checking remote work, drop-off versus scan, because not everyone has a scanner. I know the phone could work, but sometimes those images aren't that clear. Maybe you're writing some math numbers in. They might not know what number it is. So in person or scanning of some sort might work, but it may not. So thank you for bringing that up. My daughter, she goes in 3rd grade in BV. My question is, she's 100%. How does the work to generate come through? We have the information. I want to find out who we're seeing. All right, let me see if I can get that there. Does the work to generate come through? So part of the having the meet and greets is to have opportunities where we can provide information to you when you're coming. So like a teacher asked about mailing, and we do mailings from time to time, but we're trying to think, if there's a time where you're coming in anyway, can we give you materials? I know in the younger grades, they talk about baggies with like foundation letters, math manipulatives. So we're just trying to be as smart as possible. I know it felt like last year there was a lot of, it's drop off. This is our final drop off. And there kept being one after another. So we're really trying to get ahead and coordinate efforts to have you make the least amount of trips, but get the most amount of stuff that's needed. So hopefully that answered that. Find out who her teacher is. So again, at the earliest, I would think next week, because we have to look at the numbers. We have to work with teachers on class placement. So that might take, a day or two. Virtual orientation for incoming kindergarten. So that's like a backup plan, but really the goal is to do it in person. So maybe, but that's not in the talks right now. We really want to do it in small groups or even individually. We just have to coordinate that with Dr. Ruller. The first version when I talked to the kindergarten team at BV, we wanted to have every family with their child, have individual sessions, kind of like parent-teacher conferences / meet the teacher night all in one. Depending on they have their own demands as far as professional development. It may need to be groups of 4. We have to hash it out, but we really want to have a socially distant or, with masks on, some version where you're seeing eye to eye. We do not want to have your first experience through a screen. So we're really working hard on that. There's just a lot of logistics to plan. So will they still, if a student work with a school therapist and is doing remote learning? So the answer is yes. And I'm going to generalize that to all related service providers because that came up before. And they will have, you can do it remotely. However, I believe Mrs. Shookman shared that if you'd like to set up a time to come in just for that, to receive your related service provider, they'll do that. I'll use Mrs. Mayo for OT and like PT kinds of things. They work in multiple schools. So the only caveat, she said, it might be at Frank G or BV, whatever. If she has an opening on day number 3 and that's a Frank G. Lindsay day where she's working, you might have to go to Frank G. So you can choose, even if you're remote, to see your related service provider in person or remotely. But again, just know it may not be at BV. It may be where they're housed for the day. Okay. Meet their teachers. All right. And from Mrs. Varela, not only will they meet their teachers, but our goal will be to have them meet their awesome teaching assistants and anyone else that might work with them. So we just have to, again, figure out, the outdoor space would be ideal to do that. If possible, if we could do the classrooms in shifts if they're ready. But we would love to have the real interactions, not just the virtual ones. If children do the in-school option, when or how will they be able to drop off their school supplies? So I don't know the answer to that. We'll have to coordinate. Is it going to be on the superintendent conference days where they're just dropped off and then we give it time to just sit? Or is it going to be when they come? A lot of this has to do with the duration of, germs and virus stuff and, who can touch things when. So that's part of our conversation with Mr. Merlini to say, when should we be doing these things? But one of the things that came up from another parent with a kindergarten child was, it's communal. Let's all share the markers. Let's all, share papers, pass around. Not this year. Everyone's going to have their individual things. We will not be sharing, and although that's a great thing to do, it does not make sense at this time. So whether it's their own desk or caddies, there'll be some form of individuality around supplies. People also asked about books, and libraries. We may need to look at that differently as well. Again, these sprays that last for 90 days on the surface, we have to get some clarification if that will suffice, or is it better just not to even chance it and just have everybody keep their own stuff? For in school, they still have science, art. So that is the plan. Again, for music and PE, there's some 12 feet requirements. So we have to look at space, whether it's the gym, whether it's outside, whether it's the auditoria. We have to look at how many classrooms do we need to accommodate the K through 5 sections? What other spaces do we need? If the AIS teachers are classroom teachers, maybe those spaces are opened up. It can really best be answered the end of next week, but the plan is to have specials other than library and possibly science, depending on if we have someone that can do that, staffing wise. Will the school calendar be basically the same? I think basically the same. The fact that they're making these 4-day superintendent's conference days, I believe we'll need to change something later that was slated for superintendent's conference day that may change into a school day. But I would expect that Mr. Hochreiter would need to put out a revised calendar sooner than later so families and staff can plan accordingly. So that's a good question. Do our wait time, see if anything else pops up. We really miss everybody. This is very hard for the staff as well, because we want to do the right thing. We know how hard this is. Many of us have family members of our own and have struggled through this personally as well, and are eager to get our own children back into school for some normalcy, for some social interactions with peers. So we empathize, we understand, and we really want to work together with you to make this successful and to avoid doing anything in our district that causes us to close or having this opportunity to be with one another. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the evening with your family. Again, my email, joshua.cohen@henhoodschools.org. Again, you could let me know if you want to do a phone call, if you want to do a Google Meet, or just something back and forth. But I appreciate your support. The fact that you're even here speaks volumes to your involvement. I hope your kids know what you're doing and how you're advocating and inquiring on their behalfs. So thank you again. All right, have a good evening. I'm going to stop the recording now, and thank you all.